Hello, everybody, and thank you for joining us. My name is Chris Hooper, and I am brand director here at Veriff. And today's conversation is all about the subject of deepfake fraud. It's something that we've touched upon on many of our podcasts and webinars about the subject of fraud, and I think it's something that is long overdue. It's its own exploration. So today's conversation is a very exciting one I've been looking forward to for a long time. And joining me to talk about this is Aarti Samani, who is a world-renowned expert and speaker on this subject. Aarti, welcome first of all, and thank you for joining us. Would you mind just giving us a brief intro into yourself and your role and your your work in this subject?
Yeah, thank you, Chris. Lovely to be here. Thank you for inviting me to talk about this topic, which is actually very important at the moment, something I feel very passionate about just because it is impacting so many individuals as well as businesses. So I'm Aarti Samani. I'm the founder of a firm called Shreem Growth Partners, and we focus on deep fake fraud prevention services. So that includes empowering the humans in the chain, so employees, executives, customers, partners, whoever it is, giving them information, awareness, context, showing them how deepfake fraud can manifest in their environment. We also create multi-platform simulations in deepfake fraud because, as you know, Chris, deepfake is not a one-platform thing. It might start on social media, it will follow you on email, finally ending on a live video call, right? So we simulate that multi-platform deepfake fraud, and we ethically launch it on the organization in collaboration with the executive team to identify where the vulnerabilities are and where the business needs to do more work in order to kind of fortify their defenses, which is not just dependent on technology and people. And the reason we do this, and the reason I want to focus on the human aspect of it, is because deepfake is the type of fraud that exploits human trust and human emotions. And therefore, the solution cannot just be technology. Humans have to form part of the solution. Also, the tech is moving so quickly that it's impossible for the defensive technology, the detection, the protection technology to keep up with the offensive tech, which is what the bad actors are using. Now, we already employ people in our organization, so let's use that very valuable asset that we have and help them defend themselves as well as our businesses.
Love it. Yeah, that's a great intro. And I think just for my own sort of personal curiosity, really, one of the things I always ask people when I have these types of conversations is what your kind of route into this world was, because the answers I've had to this question are so varied. I mean, people have come from, I come from a journalism background myself, but folks come from financial services or we've had sort of victims of crime who have wanted to do something about it and sort of change the system. So I'm really curious what your route in is this. What's sort of your experience, if you like, and your journey to where you are right now?
Yeah, it's one of those things that you never thought you would do this, right?
Yeah.
I didn't grow up wanting to be a deepfake fraud prevention expert, but I worked in technology all my career. So I've worked in deep tech AI-based products, commercializing them, taking them to market in corporate, so also financial services, investment banking tech. So I'm very familiar with fin-crime and the risk-based approach that we take in that context. The second phase of my career was working with high growth technology scale ups. One of them was a biometric face verification business. So we were dealing with deepfakes back in 2018, 2019 when tech was picking up, but it was mostly revolved around celebrity deepfakes or known personality deepfakes. But in anticipation of where we might be, I did a lot of work on deepfakes at the time, and that kind of became a journey that I traveled on. And then recently, because the fraud is picking up, so it's like wildfire, isn't it? It's everywhere. So I kind of thought, well, I'm in a unique position where I know this attack vector inside out. I understand human psychology and human behavior, and I understand deep tech and AI very, very well. So when you put it all together, it makes me it positions me very well to work in this space and to help organizations.
Yeah, lovely to hear. And it's you kind of touched on my sort of first question about this then, which is the kind of what the threat level is today, I suppose. You mentioned this is something that as far back as 2018 and maybe before that too, that this is something that's been sort of evolving since then. But it does for me personally, in the world, the Veriff kind of view on this is that we've seen a real acceleration of this over the last probably 2 years, I would say. But where are we today? What's the sort of the threat level? Is how would you describe things? And well, what is it that what's our level of awareness that needs to be about this subject at the moment?
Yeah, sure. So the threat level is high, like it's a red alert, right? Basically. So a couple of stats I can cite. In 2024, deepfake fraud was attempted every 5 minutes in the context of identity verification. Another stat I can throw out there is 400 CEOs are targeted every minute from deepfake fraud. So CEO impersonation, 400 companies are targeted by CEO impersonation, which is deepfake fraud. So it's just all around us. Individuals are not recognizing it. They may be target and they don't even know it. Like they may be in a romance scam which is powered by deepfake and they don't even know it until it's too late. In United States, there is the whole fake worker issue. So all these deepfake powered fake workers are in the system and organizations don't even know about it. Then there are businesses who have been victims of deepfake fraud and they have talked about it very openly. But there are others who have not because of reputation damage, embarrassment factor, not wanting to spook customers, not wanting to spook the market, to implicate stock prices. So there's a lot that we don't hear about, but it doesn't mean it's not there. It is it is just everywhere. And the reason it's everywhere is because it's easier to break into humans than it is to break into technology, right? So deepfake is great because you can target the humans directly, you can exploit them, and you don't have to worry about breaking into the system. It's the path of least resistance. It plays on our instincts, right? We are taught to trust what we see and hear. From the time we grow up, we are taught to trust authority and not question them. All these things make it a very, very effective form of attack vector, high return on investment, low barriers to entry. So if you think about the fraud as a business, it just makes it is perfect. Like it has perfect recipes for a successful business, and that's why we see it all around us.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. We're sort of seeing the same thing at Veriff actually too, and I think that it's as you say, it's kind of the perfect storm. It almost feels like, doesn't it now, where we've got this very sophisticated machinery, which is sort of scalable and easily available, and actually quite cheap to purchase these days as well. So fraud as a service is something that I feel like is very much a growth industry at the moment, which is quite alarming. And you mentioned some of the types of fraud, sort of what the how this sort of takes shape, I suppose. Have there been any kind of real world examples that you could point to, and things that have been in the news that people may have heard of that have utilized this type of technology?
Yeah, absolutely. So, like the most known case is the deepfake CFO in Hong Kong, right? So, British company, Hong Kong office targeted, impersonation victim, the CFO, target victim, the execution victim, a finance controller in their team. Over a period of a few days, built trust. Final strike, invited the financial controller on a Zoom call. Every face on that call was a deepfake except the victim themselves, and convinced them to transfer 25 million US dollars. Now, this is the most well publicized, the well known case that you can find online, but there are several others, right? So, more recently, we had the Italian Defense Ministry targeted. And here, the attackers deepfaked or impersonated some of the people working in the ministry and reached out to some very high profile business owners, fashion houses in Italy, saying some of our Italian citizens have been held hostage by hostile nations, and we desperately need funds to free them and bring them home. Like an example of a deepfake fraud. There is the Admiral's FX crypto trading platform, which has been operating out of Georgia. An 85 people call center, run like a call center business, tricked over 6,000 people into parting with $35 million, right? All powered by deepfake. And this is in an individual capacity. More recently, we had the fake of the YouTube CEO, Neil Mohan. His video was used to send out to content creators, asking them or telling them that YouTube terms and conditions and monetization models have been updated. Click on the link to accept it and log in to your account and click on the link, giving away credentials, installing malware through malicious links. The biggest one is the fake worker scam that is going around in United States and now coming into Europe, where remote jobs or jobs advertised remotely in technology are applied for by workers in nation state who conduct interviews through a deepfake video call, get the job, and then they do what they are mandated to do. In Asia, there is hostile sort of digital arrest scams where fraudsters pretend to be police inspectors, investigators, tax collectors, etc., and really force people into believing that they owe a lot of money, and if it wasn't paid, then they would be prosecuted, imprisoned, etc. So it's amazing how creative these folks get and what kind of how these attacks manifest. It's just mind-boggling.
It really is. Yeah, it's terrifying, and some of the numbers you mentioned in there are astoundingly high in terms of the sort of the profit margins on these, if you like, and that kind of thing too. One of the really interesting ones that you mentioned there actually is this kind of fake worker scam that's sort of running at the moment, especially in the US, but I think more so across the world as well as things move forward. But this is something that seems to be relatively new and well, I mean, I think quite well, I say relatively new. It's something that's come to attention relatively recently. I should maybe phrase it that way. But it seems to be really worrying as well that in this sort of age of remote work and sort of the importance of IP and that kind of thing, how all of a sudden businesses are very open to a fake employee getting a job there and getting access to God knows what data. And it's one of those things that is really kind of cross-industry. Like nobody is safe from that. That's not something that is just financial services or just marketplaces, as we know. We sort of break things up by vertical here, but something that applies to everyone. And I think that is probably going to be, yeah, in my mind at least, the biggest use case for sort of these, the sort of defensive platforms in the long run. But I'm really curious about how businesses in particular, sort of, those sort of working in the B2B sort of enterprise space, how are they being targeted? Obviously, we've mentioned this fake employee sort of route. Are there other things too that they should be aware of?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is a game of whack-a-mole, right? Someone described it as a cat and mouse the other day. I was on a call, but it's a whack-a-mole. You thwart one, and it appears in a different form in another place. It's like the manifestation changes. That's why they're called shapeshifters, right? So the kind of frauds that the enterprises are seeing at the moment, like vendor impersonation, is a classic. So actually, let me take a step back. Deepfake fraudsters know that the security teams are on high alert, right? So they are not necessarily targeting the security team where the defenses are the most strong. They are targeting peripheral teams. So fake worker targeting the CTO and the HR offices in an organization. Vendor impersonation, payment fraud, etc., targeting the finance team, the CFO's office. Group executives against each other. So if you're a large enterprise and you have a group CEO, a regional CEO, etc., so executives targeted and played against each other. So these guys or these people are very clever, and there is a whole science, a whole science of fraud design, right? So how do we design the fraud in a way which is delivering the highest return on investment in the quickest time, taking the path of least resistance? So that's why we see a lot of vendor impersonation, which is where a voice note, a cloned voice note, or a deepfake video is utilized, sent to the finance team to say, hey, I'm from company XYZ, we are your partners or your suppliers, and just to inform you, our bank details have changed, please update it and make sure this forthcoming invoice is paid into this account. And in a lot of cases, when I've spoken with finance teams, they say they corroborated this information with their executives. But the executives also receive a similar message from their counterpart in the vendor organization. So the executive thinks, oh, yeah, this must be valid. Then the finance person receives something similar from their counterpart. They must think it's valid. When they corroborate, they are corroborating false information against each other, and two negatives is making a positive in this case. And so they lose money. So it's just amazing how they are kind of targeting people. The other thing, which is not often talked about, is when people are remember, employees are individuals, right? We are not just professionals, we are humans who have a whole other life outside of our work environment. When that individual is targeted in their personal space from deepfake fraud, they are now a liability and a risk to the organization. And that's how they get to the enterprises, right? So they get to the enterprises. So if someone is in a romance scam unknown to them, they are unknowingly and quite naively revealing information like, oh, I had a great day at work today. We closed deal XYZ. Suddenly you've given a data point, right? Or we're traveling for a sales kickoff on this date to this location, and we have a full-on agenda to discuss ABC. You've given a data point. All these data points go into the fraud design, which culminates into a very, very effective attack, right? So it's targeting in from multiple angles. The other thing you mentioned earlier, like fraud targets businesses of all sizes, all sectors. SMBs, small and medium-sized businesses, are now used as gateways to get to the enterprises. So I was speaking to a company just 2 days ago, a 6-people company based in the United States. They have some, very high-profile clients. They have become a target of deepfake fraud from some of these IT workers, and the motivation has been to reach the clients that they are serving. So it's like attack from all sides, and so that's why I call it a game of whack-a-mole. Like you stop one and the other one pops up.
Yeah, I love that analogy, and I think it's something that we've kind of seen here at Veriff with our work here too. We have cross-linking across industries. So we have obviously there's a number of industries that we work in, and if we see some activity in a certain one, we know that that's a threat to watch out for in others too. But kind of what we're seeing too is that financial services companies are the end target, if you like, but further down the chain is where the weakness is. And as you mentioned, humans are often the weakest link in the chain. So people are being targeted on social media platforms or dating platforms just to get access to that person in the hope that further down the line they can sort of start to access their financial accounts too. And so, it's a really tough one for financial services to legislate against, because really the problem is happening way downstream, and it's a really tricky thing to sort of get your head around. I think that this kind of joined up nature, and I guess the only real way to sort of fight against that sort of thing is to have that visibility of what's happening in other industries too. But what would you say about sort of the importance here around sort of verifying authenticity of people, be they customers or new employees or whatever it may be? Surely it's more important than ever.
Absolutely. Like you can't stress enough the importance of verifying authenticity, verifying them as a human being, but also the human being who claim to have the identity that they have, etc. So really important at every stage. Like from the moment an individual is born, they are given an identity with a name and a birth certificate, to the point when they leave the world, they're given a death certificate, right? And during that whole process, there has to be an identity which carries forward at every step of the way, and one that can be verified securely without being broken into. Now, therein is the challenge, right? Like, how do you do that? Over a lifespan of 70 years, 80 years, how do you carry that identity forward, especially when we have such large surface area that we are working in at the moment? But and that's where companies like Veriff, who make a lot of investment in technology R&D to verify identity, become really, really important and play a major part in defending and securing.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's just talk a little bit more. I mean, we mentioned some of the industries, if you like, that are kind of experiencing some of this stuff. But we're talking about the sectors and the personas who are most at risk here. Which would you identify as being where the sort of the main watch out were to be, or is that kind of just a futile exercise and it's kind of across the board? What would you say to that?
I would say it is a futile
Yeah.
exercise. And the reason I say that is because think about, so attackers are not thinking, how am I going to attack this business necessarily? They're thinking, I have these assets. How am I going to use these assets to get more, right? And then what are the motivations? So initially, it was thought that money is the only motivation and the driver behind a lot of these frauds and scams. We know differently now, right? We know that it's not just money, sensitive data, other kinds of information, credentials, access to your customers, access to your staff database. Like all of these are assets of value that every business holds and needs to guard, right? So if you're an SMB, what do you have? Well, you have a bank account, you have customers, you have data, and you probably have some sensitive information about your customers, right? So already you have assets of value that the attacker might want. Now, if you're in regulated industries, the value of those assets is much higher, right? And therefore, it's worthwhile them investing more time in creating a very well designed fraud. So you see a whole range. You see like petty criminals or pickpockets that target SMBs, use them as sandbox environment almost, right? So small businesses have lower awareness, lower security guards. Therefore, they become a sandbox environment to try and test out some of these attack vectors. Once the technique is perfected, it is then utilized to target the larger enterprises. So it's I'm hearing engineering firms, FS obviously, e-commerce, lawyers, tech businesses. Like I'm hearing across the board where people are now, leaders are coming forward to talk about this. And even security companies have been targeted, right? We heard about a very big case last summer of a fake remote worker, and that was an, a, a listed security business. So if they can be targeted, then you can imagine every other business is at risk.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think let's stay on that subject because I think that's as I said, we mentioned earlier on in the conversation here that I think that sort of fake employee angle feels like the one that is a real sort of top of mind for folks at the moment, or should be. And I think maybe the reason for this is that the sort of the customer identity verification piece is kind of it's been going a while. It's pretty good. I think most companies who have the need to verify remote customers have got the systems in place that allow them to do so now. That's not necessarily the case for other teams within the business, right? And you mentioned sort of the HR or recruitment team, and I think that sort of weakness is feels like the one that's being exploited or is likely to be most exploited next. So let's just talk about that kind of fake remote workers piece, because I think that. How is it exactly that fraudsters are using deepfakes there to exploit or find holes in the hiring process, do you think?
Yeah, sure. So firstly, it starts on the platforms, right, where jobs are advertised. So a ton of fake profiles on social media everywhere. And those profiles are made to believe like they have a lot of experience. They've worked in a lot of high profile businesses, got great educational credentials, etc. When jobs are advertised on these platforms, the workers apply for them, or they have a team, right? They have a team. So there's one of a segment of the team who's responsible for job application. So jobs, they're applied and they go by numbers. Thousands and thousands of jobs are applied for. Then comes the CV review process, right? So the hiring managers or recruiters or HR managers, they review the CVs and they think, okay, this is great. They don't often do a cross check of the information. They might look at the resume, they might do a superficial search online to see that the resume corroborates with other information that's out there, but they don't necessarily do a reverse check of the picture, for example, and other forms of checks. So the CV goes through, then comes the interview process. Now, the interview process for a remote job is often through a video call. that video call is where the first use of deepfake happens in this kind of fraud. So on a call like you and I are speaking on, the individual who is doing the interview, who is the interviewer, um, will take on a different face. The interviewee will take on a different face. You don't know this is real or not. The tech is so good that unless you're forensically looking for signs of sort of blurriness, etc., you can't really tell that this is not a real face, especially when people use virtual backgrounds as well. It often gets blurred, and that blur kind of goes into the face, and the whole image is just a bit disturbed. If they complain about bad network connection, etc., we're kind of let that pass, right? Yeah, okay, we all have connectivity issues, but that's where the first use of deepfake happens. They are often very good at the interview process. They know their stuff, but sometimes there's also cases where they're using co-pilots. So when the interviewer asks the question, they're reading the responses of the co-pilot, right? And that's a good telltale sign. But then when they are recruited, when they're hired, they have to go through identity and background check. Now, this is the next place where deepfake is utilized. So you know this space very well, right? So identity documents are forged and they're available very cheaply on the dark web. The liveness detection is where deepfake is utilized. So the whole identity process, in like you say, in a customer perspective, it is fairly stringent, fairly tight. But when it comes to employees, for some reason, we are more trusting because we want these people as our colleagues, right? So the process there is a little bit weaker. So we now need to go through a KYE. I hope, right? Like we had KYC, which works very well, still holes in there, but on the whole, it's kind of getting there. But KYE, know your employee, is the one which is very, very weak at the moment. So when I speak to my clients, I always advise them to partner with their security teams to do these checks very, very thoroughly and apply the same stringent measures that they would apply in a KYC type scenario.
That's that was going to be my next question actually, is sort of what tips would you give to sort of hiring managers or sort of HR teams that can sort of help them sort of navigate these waters? As I say, the sort of the technology is available and very likely that your business is using it for customer verification, but is it just that, or is there more to it than that in terms of the process that they go through when it comes to sort of making sure that their system is as robust as it can be?
Well, there is more, right? Because KYE is at the end of the process. So it's after you have decided to bring this individual on board. The start of the process is when you receive an application from someone, right? So at that point, you must verify, is this a genuine applicant or is this a fake profile? Now, this is where I'm working with a business partner to create a product to verify the LinkedIn profiles, which to understand what the confidence level in that profile is of how authentic or how AI generated this might be. Now, LinkedIn, for example, has the verification badge, but we all know that that process that you go through to get the verification badge is very, very insecure. For example, you can use your work email address and verify your work email address to get the badge, and you would be classified as a verified profile. But that is really not very secure at all, because I know fake profiles who have that badge who've used their work email address to verify and they haven't been real. So that's the first step. Like, let's go through the profile, look at some of these red flags and understand whether this could be a real applicant or not. Like, what is our confidence level there? Then we bring them to the interview process, right? At that point, we need to be visually looking for signs of fake on the video calls, on the interview calls, and that could be sort of visually looking at signs, or it could be sort of by asking questions, and they're not mutually exclusive. You have to do both. So any reluctance to get on the camera is a red flag. Constant network issues for every interview is a red flag that we need to be looking out for. But also, when someone claims to be located in a certain place, they claim to have been to a certain university, let's ask softer questions to validate that information informally, right? So until now, hiring managers have been trained to do competency check, make sure they have the right skills for the job that they are being recruited for, etc. But let's now also ask questions that do authenticity check, right? And I always advise every organization, you should have your own set of questions which do the authenticity check, right? You do the culture check, you do competency check. Now let's do authenticity check as well. And then, of course, you can deploy the technology as well, which is deepfake detection technology, identifying during these kind of remote video calls, etc. So there is a before precaution that you have to take. There is the during process, and then there's the post process, which is where the KYE and some of the identity verification checks come in.
Yeah, it sounds to me that, a lot of what you were talking about there comes down to, I mean, largely about sort of awareness, I guess. And as we mentioned that some of these deepfake videos and things like that are very hard to see with the naked eye unless you know what you're looking for. So I think that sort of stems back to training as well, doesn't it? And I think, is there a piece around this where this is just an area that all employees will need to have some sort of level of training and awareness management when it comes to detecting this type of thing? Because, as I say, HR is the one at the moment, but that's not to say that in the future other teams might be sort of vulnerable to this too. Do you think that's the area that most businesses fall down on at the moment?
Absolutely. So, I said at the start of our conversation, deepfake targets humans, and therefore humans have to be part of the defense, right? So, when you ask people, hey, do you know about deepfake fraud? Most people will say, yeah, we know deepfake. Taylor Swift was deepfake, Elon Musk is deepfake and selling investment opportunities, etc. Most people, 90% of the people, do not know how these will manifest in their professional or personal environment beyond investment scams, right? So there is a large gaping hole right there. Like, if people do not know what this fraud is, what is the context, and what it looks like, and how it's likely to show up for you, what chance have we got in them being able to spot it and therefore stop it, right? So the information awareness piece becomes very, very important. Now, a lot of the times organizations tell me, oh, yeah, we have awareness programs, they're on demand learning platforms. And when I look at those platforms, they are the very classic, here's a scenario, here's a checkbox, which is the right option, right? Now, deepfake does not work like that. So these L&D platforms, which are designed to do on demand for the phishing simulations that happened 10 years ago, do not work in these emerging threats. So, what we have to do is show them. We have to have our employees experience it in a safe environment. It's an experiential fraud versus, a binary, like it'll happen, not happen, right? Because it is so elusive, it is such a shapeshifter that unless you've experienced it, your triggers are not on alert. So we need to create awareness programs and learning and training, which is elevating the retention and recall rate. So when they are faced with this, that voice is in their head, that video of the training program is in their head, that case study is in their head, right? So we need to be thinking in that direction. And unfortunately, a lot of organizations just are not.
Yeah, it's you're absolutely right, and I love the way you describe that. I think a new type of fraud requires a new type of training, doesn't it? I mean, it's sort of as simple as that, really. And I think that how do businesses then go about sort of building that kind of culture, if you like, that will sort of minimise exposure to any kind of deepfake fraud?
So I always say, right now, with the way deepfake fraud is going, business culture and risk exposure are almost directly correlated. And why I say this is because, going back to that human manipulation, the human exploitation, right? If we're under pressure, if we're under an emergency environment, if our fight or flight sort of instincts are kicking in, if we are exhausted, if we don't feel psychologically safe, if there is not enough trust and transparency in the organization, all of these contribute to a higher risk exposure, because when a deepfake fraud attacks you, they are creating a sense of urgency and they're asking you to do something, right? If you feel the urgency, you give in to that, you've committed or you've played into the hands of the victims. If there isn't enough transparency in the organization of what is happening commercially, what is happening financially, and in other parts of the business, you do not have the context, and therefore you cannot deploy your contextual awareness to work out whether this request from the CFO makes sense or not, right? If there is a very high distance between the executive and the employees, they have no idea what sense of humor does my CEO have? What is their level of sarcasm, right? They are not able to deploy critical thinking to pick out some of these anomalies which only humans can. And so risk and culture are very, very intertwined at the moment. And again, it comes down to HR to lead some of this, right? HR have been talking about culture for a long time. Now they can tie bad culture to high risk exposure and therefore loss of finance and reputation.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a very good summary, and I think we've sort of gone into a number of different subjects today. But I think one of the things I always like to ask people on these types of calls and conversations is their predictions and what we want to see. So it's crystal ball time for you, I'm afraid, Aarti. But what are some of the we've covered some of the things that you sort of saw in 2025. 2024. Do you think that 2025 is going to be much the same in terms of the types of fraud that we're seeing and the types of applications of deepfake fraud? Or do you think that there is sort of some new stuff that's on the horizon that we should be aware of? Is there anything that you would sort of identify there?
Yeah, so agentic AI, right? Like everybody is talking about agentic AI. It's being like people are cheering it on, etc. But with agentic AI comes agentic AI fraud as well. So, and deepfake again is a very good technology to be utilizing for that. So I expect to see a lot of agentic AI type fraud where two agents are talking to each other, creating a conversation to then deceive the victim and instructing them into doing certain things. I'm also seeing a trend in terms of localized fraud. So, for example, in India, we are seeing a lot of digital arrest type fraud, and now they have perfected that in that region, in that country. It is gradually starting to permeate west into Europe, into United States. On the other side, the fake remote workers started in North America, in United States. They've been perfected over there. There is a lot of awareness. It's now permeating into Europe. So that, very sort of localized, very customized fraud vectors in different parts of the world launched and then sort of coming into other parts, into other regions once the techniques have been perfected. As I mentioned earlier, we're seeing a lot of sandbox environments in forms of SMBs where techniques are utilized, perfected, and then launched in other parts, in large enterprises, in other sectors, etc. So as tech is getting better, as there are more and more co-pilots, as there is more kind of wider cyber-social terrain in which our information is floating around, it's becoming really, really, we're going to see more of the same, but also leveraging any new tech that comes on the market.
Yeah, and I mean, from a practical point of view, then, how would a business kind of prepare for that? If if the future is potentially unknown, or there are sort of known threats and unknown unknowns, I think is the phrase I've heard once before. But how would a business go about kind of providing those, bolstering its defences against those sort of emerging AI fraud risks? Would you say?
Yeah, it's a very tricky one, isn't it? That's $1 million question, right? And as always, it has to be sort of tech, process, and people. And until now, people have not formed a big part of the security defense focus, and it has to now. So we are not going to be able to predict what will come next reliably, but what we can do is shift the mindset with which we operate, right? So we are now, what we're saying is don't trust digital interactions, even if it is with the individual that you know very, very well, because you trust the person, but the digital interaction with that person may not be genuine, may not be authentic. So treat every digital action with curiosity, with caution, and let's give that information to everyone that we can through media, through government, as employers. The other piece is that make sure that your tech is as best as you can get, right? A lot of the times when I speak with CISOs, they tell me, and I really feel for them, I empathize because they tell me we have so much legacy security debt that we are busy filling those gaps. We don't have the mind share or the bandwidth to think about these deepfake attacks which are emerging and forthcoming, right? Now, this is where AI enforces the breakdown of silos, and so it is the case here. We have to break down silos. So it's not just the security officers, security teams' responsibility for protection. HR can be a partner to the CISO, right, through running some of these awareness programs, etc. CMOs can be a partner to the CISOs, right? Like, are we protecting our executive brand? Are we following the breadcrumb trails on social media? What information are they giving out? What is our social media policy so we are not inadvertently giving pieces of information that can be utilized against us? So every vertical function in an organization is as responsible for defense as is the CISO's office, right? This chief revenue officer, I'm running a sales kickoff. I have an opportunity here to include a session on awareness around various types of emerging fraud. And their teams are at the front line, right? So they are faced with this day in, day out. So, in terms of apart from the technology and the process, which we should always have the best that we can get, the human defense has to elevate, the human defense has to strengthen. And here, each executive, every vertical owner has to play their part and has to take a responsibility and partner with the CISO's office.
Yeah, I fully agree with that. I think it's, security of the business is, it has to be a shared responsibility as we move into this world of AI powered fraud. It's one of those things that, in previous history, I know certainly, roles I've had in the past and things like that, it was almost a box checking exercise where you had to go through a certain level of, awareness around email fraud and things like that, for example, as well, where once you'd done the course, you'd satisfied the requirement and you didn't have to, there was no sort of need for recall or anything like that, other than, you just kind of went on with your sort of work life, I suppose. But I think that has changed, it feels like. And what would be if we were to give sort of one takeaway from this conversation here, is it around that kind of level of urgency? Is that sort of what you'd point to, I think, for businesses here?
Yeah, absolutely. It is here. It's not a hypothetical threat anymore. It's urgent, it's imminent. Unfortunately, for most businesses, I will say it's a matter of when rather than if, right? So let's not be complacent. Let's do everything we can to get our sort of our tentacles on high alert. Let's get these emerging fraud vectors on the radars of our employees, of our partners, of our customers, of our board directors. Like, that's a demographic we did not talk about, but actually they are probably some of the least aware when it comes to this. And just recently, I was speaking to someone who was targeted by the deepfake video of one of their board directors asking them to do something. And it was only because this individual had received an awareness training on deepfake fraud. He went and cross-checked with the board director, and it turned out that those weren't authentic instructions, they were fabricated. And so, like, every human who is involved with our organization needs to be aware of this, needs to be informed, and it is our responsibility as employers to do this job. We can't just rely on governments and regulations. Like, a lot of times I hear people say, well, regulators should do this and we should have global regulations. I agree, we should. We should absolutely do everything we can to push the government, to push the regulators, but there's a limit. We can't execute it ourselves, right? Unless you are in that role, you are not in a position to execute it. You're in a position to lobby for it. You can respond to calls for comments, but what can you practically do? And that is take responsibility as an employer to empower your teams.
Absolutely, I fully agree with that. I think it's something we've seen in a number of fields actually, where regulation by its nature is always 2 or 3 steps behind. It sort of gets there after the horse has bolted to a certain extent, doesn't it? And I think with the speed with which this type of fraud is moving as well, any regulation you put in place now would almost be sort of rendered redundant within a year, maybe less than that, and then you have to start the whole process over again. So I think that the burden of the responsibility does sit with businesses, does sit with the owners and the leaders of those businesses, but does also sit with everybody else within that business too. Well, just one last point there, just to finish off. I know we're sort of close to time, but what is the sort of the one action you would point to then for businesses to improve their defences against deepfake fraud? What's the one takeaway they can sort of from having this conversation to sort of really make a practical difference to what they do?
Yeah, make human defense part of your cybersecurity strategy. Like, if I can put it very succinctly, that's what I would say. And human defenses include awareness and training, but they also include ethical simulations mirroring real life scenarios. So we're thinking from an attacker's mindset and executing those simulations, because if you don't think like an attacker, then you can't really predict what's going to happen, and therefore you are always a few steps behind that.
Yeah, I fully agree with that. So that's a good point to end on. I think we've covered an awful lot of ground today. So there's a lot in here, and hopefully your folks will appreciate that level of information. But Aarti, just remains for me to say thank you to you for joining us today. It was a very, very informative conversation, and as I say, we covered an awful lot of stuff. But I think there's some great things in there, some great takeaways as well. So thank you very much for your time. I appreciate it.
Thank you for inviting me and giving me this platform to really drive this message forward, something that I feel very passionately about.
Stuff. Okay, and thank you everybody for listening, and we'll catch you next time.